Alrighty, so here we go. They were getting into a war. American imperialism and the rise of Teddy. So here you go. In the middle here, this is a political cartoon about American imperialism. It says 10,000 miles from tip to tip. So this is the American eagle standing on the United States. One eagle or one wing of the eagle is going over and covering all of the Western Pacific, Hawaii and the Philippines, as well as covering out into the Atlantic, Puerto Rico and Cuba. You may be cool, but you'll never be Teddy Roosevelt riding on a moose cool. And Teddy Roosevelt, yeah, you don't mess with Teddy Roosevelt. Do you know why you never say Bigfoot? Teddy Roosevelt killed Bigfoot, shot him down on a hunting trip. Yep, true story. There's the picture right there. I found this picture on the internet, so of course it's true, right? All right, so let's talk a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt because he becomes a pretty important figure. He dominates American politics, American society, America in general in the early 1900s. Teddy Roosevelt is born into a very wealthy, very well connected, historic family in New York. They've been here literally for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The Roosevelts came over well before when the United States was still creating, when England was still creating colonies in what would become the United States. That's when his family shows up. So we're not even a country yet when his family comes up, and they become very, very powerful. They become extraordinarily rich in New York. So he graduates from Harvard. He goes to Columbia Law School and he drops out because he wanted to pursue a career in politics. Now, early in his life, Teddy Roosevelt has really, really debilitating asthma, and it really restricts his ability to go outside and play. His father, wanting him to be able to do something physical, his father gets him into bodybuilding. And eventually, over time, with age and with improved personal health, Teddy Roosevelt overcomes asthma. And probably, pound for pound, Teddy Roosevelt is the strongest, most physically fit president we've ever had. Teddy Roosevelt is a moose. I mean, my goodness, is he strong. He's elected to the New York State Assembly, state legislature, as a Republican in 1882. He's pretty successful. And then comes February 14th, 1884. Worst day ever. Ever, ever, ever. Valentine's Day. So Teddy Roosevelt's father has since passed on. And Teddy Roosevelt lives in a very large house in New York City. It essentially takes up an entire block in New York City, his house does. And Teddy Roosevelt's mother lives in one side of the house, and Teddy Roosevelt lives on the other side of the house with his family. His mother is very sick during the month of February 1884. She has typhoid fever. And on February 14th, early in the morning, she dies. Later that day, Teddy Roosevelt's wife gives birth to a daughter. And shortly after giving birth to her daughter, Teddy Roosevelt's wife dies as complications of pregnancy. So, in the span of just a couple of days, in the same house, in the span of a couple of hours, in the same house, in the same day, Teddy Roosevelt, mother and wife, dies. And this is so debilitating for Teddy Roosevelt that in his personal diary, his only entry on February 14th, 1884, is a giant X through the day. And beneath it, he says, "The light in my life has gone out." And from this day forward, Teddy Roosevelt will never again speak about this day with anybody. So impactful on him that Teddy Roosevelt decides that he doesn't want to be in politics any longer, and he decides he wants to move out west and become a cowboy. He's always been fascinated with cowboys and the West and adventure and so on and so forth. So he buys this huge sprawling ranch in what was at that time called the Dakotas. Today it's in present day North Dakota. There was no North or South Dakota at that time. It was just the Dakotas. And Teddy Roosevelt moves out there to become a cowboy. And he embraces the entire cowboy life. He's got horses and he's got cattle and he's, doing all these things that cowboys do out there. He loves hunting, absolutely loves hunting. In fact, the teddy bear is named after Teddy Roosevelt after a bear hunting trip. And the bear hunting trip doesn't go well. And some maids at the hotel that he was staying at leave a stuffed animal, a stuffed toy on his bed and says, "Here's your bear, Teddy." Well, the story gets out in the public. People want a copy of this toy, and the teddy bear is born. So that's where you get teddy bear from. So he loves hunting. And Teddy Roosevelt, while he's out there being a cowboy, he establishes his reputation that he's a man you don't mess with. One time he's stringing some fence line. He's building a new corral, and he's got this river that goes through his property. So he took this boat down the river to build his fence. And he's up on the hill, and these three thieves, bad guys, jump into his boat and they take off. They steal his boat. Well, Teddy Roosevelt chases them down the river and eventually is able to catch them, beats the bejesus out of these three guys. He ties them up, and then he takes the boat back up the river and turns them over to the police. Another time, he's in a feed store buying hay and stuff for his livestock, and the cowboy comes in and starts kind of harassing Teddy Roosevelt, calling him out, saying he's not a real cowboy, he's a Eastern pretty boy, and he's wearing glasses and so on and so forth. And Teddy Roosevelt turned around and punched the guy out, just laid him out right there in the store, and then continued on about his business, and then on his way out, walked over the guy as he's still laying on the floor. So Teddy Roosevelt, you don't mess with Teddy Roosevelt. He's just, he is a man's man. Well, in 1887, Teddy Roosevelt decides he's had enough of being a cowboy, and he returns to New York City, and he's elected the police commissioner, basically chief of the police. And he decides that he's going to end the corruption in the New York City Police Department. Remember, the New York City Police Department is run by the party bosses and the political machines at that time. And he's going to clean up the police department. And on his first day, he fires over half of the New York City Police Department for corruption charges. And he begins to modernize the police force. He begins to install telephones and things like that in police stations. He institutes a policy of physical fitness and fitness tests for police. During his time as police commissioner, he personally would go out and patrol police beats, out in the streets of New York, and he would go into some of the worst parts of New York that police were afraid to go to because it was so crime-ridden and so dangerous. Well, Teddy Roosevelt would go there. And while he was doing that, he met with Jacob Riis. Remember the guy who writes How the Other Half Lives? And Jacob Riis begins to take Teddy Roosevelt on a tour of the slums and show him how these people live. And it affects Teddy Roosevelt so deeply that Teddy Roosevelt tells Jacob Riis, if I ever have the chance, I'm going to make these people's lives better. Now, because of his efforts to clean up the corruption and clean up the crime and basically be a true progressive, it leads to a lot of conflicts within the Republican Party. The Republican Party, although they're not the majority party in New York City, they're certainly benefiting from a lot of the corruption and bribery. And Teddy Roosevelt is cleaning that up. And so he very, very, very quickly becomes extraordinarily unpopular with New York City Republicans. They do not like Teddy Roosevelt at all. Teddy Roosevelt does what Teddy Roosevelt wants to do. Teddy Roosevelt says what Teddy Roosevelt wants to say. And he really doesn't care about anybody else. He sees what he's doing as the best thing for the people. And the people who are benefiting from the bribery and the corruption are not happy at all. So that brings us to the 1896 election. This guy, William McKinley, runs for president. He's a Republican. Roosevelt is a good, loyal Republican, even though the Republican Party really doesn't like Teddy Roosevelt. he can't. Roosevelt goes out and campaigns for McKinley. Roosevelt's very well known, especially in New York City. He's extraordinarily wealthy, and so he does a lot to help McKinley get elected. McKinley wins easily. Now, one of the cool things to do when you're president is you get to give people jobs who helped you get elected. So he's going to reward Teddy Roosevelt by naming him the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Now, this is going to turn out to be a really important job. Teddy Roosevelt is a naval historian. He falls in love with naval history, and he's written a couple of books by this time about the history of naval warfare and so on and so forth. Teddy Roosevelt, this is why it's important. Teddy Roosevelt's going to oversee this massive expansion of the Navy. The U.S. Navy is going to become immensely larger and more powerful. The reason for this is McKinley wants the United States to become a legitimate world power. We've gotten past slavery. We've brought the country back together. We're on the way to becoming an economic powerhouse because of industrialization and the robber barons and that. McKinley sees the next step as the United States becoming a legitimate world power, a military power. And McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt both believe that in order to be a world power, the country has to have an empire. An empire meaning that you control land beyond your borders, right? And they go back through history. Every major world power, every major country in the history of the world has had an empire. They've all controlled land beyond their own country for political and for military and for economic reasons. So Teddy Roosevelt, McKinley see this is the next thing for the United States to do. To be a world power and to have an empire, to win and hold an empire, you need a navy. The navy was the most important part of the military at that time. We don't have an air force. So to get from place to place to place to place, especially a place like the United States, which is bordered on two sides by oceans, we need a navy. And the navy is the key to world power and an empire. And Teddy Roosevelt's going to oversee the expansion of the navy. All right, so let's talk about imperialism. So what are the reasons why countries want an empire? Okay. They want it for economic reasons. You can use your territories in your empire to get raw goods, raw materials, and resources that your country doesn't necessarily have. Gold or timber or iron or coal, things like that. If your country doesn't have enough, you can go to other places that do have that stuff, oil, and take them over. And then you can use their resources for your benefit. Political. You have the ability to expand your political power. The more people you have under you, in your control, the more political power you personally have and your country has. So you continue to expand your influence, continue to expand your domination around the world. That builds your political power as an individual as well as a country. Military. Okay. This is a way to show off your military power and your military might, right? You can go somewhere and you can conquer somebody. And it's like flexing your muscles. It's, putting on the show. And hopefully other countries will respect you for that. And it gives you a reason to have a large, powerful military to go out and take over these countries and flex your muscles. There's cultural. This is kind of the racist portion of this. The belief that other places are not as developed or as civilized as yours. So you're going to go there and you're going to help them become civilized. You see what you're doing as a positive thing, that these people can't possibly function. These people are not civilized. These people are not cultured enough. These people are just not smart enough to know how to do things. So you're going to go there and help them, and you're going to carry them to civilization. You're going to carry them to being more human. and then religious. Okay, and it ties in kind of with number 4. Their religion is not as good as your religion. So you're going to go and spread your religion. You're going to go and create more converts to your religious beliefs, because that'll make the world better if everybody is your religion. Christians have done this. Muslims have done this. Jews have done this. All major religions have gone out and tried to convert people, either by choice or forcefully, to their religion, because the native religions, the pagan religions, are not as good, in your opinion, as yours. So you're going to go and bring your religion and make these people better. All right, so here's the criteria for United States imperialism. This is what Roosevelt and McKinley say. This is, if we're going to create an empire, this is what the places that we go to, this is what they need to meet. This is what they need to do for the United States. They have to benefit the United States. There has to be a reason for us to go there. There has to be some reason for it to be good or beneficial to the United States. We're not going to go conquer Swaziland, let's say, which is a tiny country in Africa. We're not going to go conquer Swaziland because there's nothing in Swaziland for us. We don't get anything out of defeating Swaziland. There's no resources. There's nothing there for us. So it has to benefit the United States. We have to be able to win. It's very embarrassing to try to create an empire and you show up somewhere and you don't win. So we have to be very careful about who we're going to fight and take on in this push for imperialism. We're not going to fight the English. We can't beat them. We're not going to fight the Germans. We can't beat them. So we have to be able. We have to go wherever we go. We have to be able to win. We have to be able to hold it once we win, right? It's not going to do us any good to win a territory and then a couple of months or a couple of years down the road not be able to control it and hold on to it. So we have to be able to hold it and control it. So here are the 3 places that McKinley and Roosevelt roll out a map, right? And they roll out the map on a table and they look for places that meet all of these criteria for the United States, that it'll benefit us, we can win, and we can hold on to it. And here's what they come up with. Cuba. Cuba is the closest country to the United States not touching it. It's 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And if we can control Cuba, the belief is, we can control European trade in and out of Latin America, in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. We can control who comes in and we can control what goes out. So it would benefit the United States being able to control that. The Philippines. The Philippines, one of the crown jewels for all empires is China, access to China. China has lots of cool stuff that people want. The problem is China is so huge and there's so many people that it's impossible to take over China at this time. Nobody can do it. So what the Philippines would do for the United States, the Philippines are right off the coast of China. If we can control the Philippines, then we can control the traffic, the trade coming into and going out of at least a part of China if we have the Philippines. So it gives us access to China trade, and it gives us the ability to control some Chinese trade. And then Hawaii. Hawaii is about halfway between the United States and the Philippines. So it would be a really nice place for ships to stop and resupply and refuel going to or coming from the Philippines, right? It's a nice stopping point. Also, Hawaii is the largest producer in the world of a food that is quickly becoming a staple of the American diet. Very, very important to the American diet. Sugar. Currently, Hawaii is an independent country at this time. It's the country of Hawaii. And since it's its own country, when they ship sugar to the United States, there's a tariff, there's a tax on imported goods. So there's a tax that's put on the sugar. That drives up the price of sugar. If we take over Hawaii, not only is it a good stopping point for refueling and resupplying, it also becomes a part of the United States, becomes a territory of the United States, which means there's no longer a tariff, a tax put on the sugar when it arrives, and it lowers the price of sugar. So here's the thing. The Philippines and Cuba are the last pieces of the once great Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire has been slowly dying a very long, very painful death for the last couple hundred years, last 200 years. And Cuba and the Philippines are about the only things that Spain has out of that. So we're pretty sure we can beat the Spanish. They're very poor. Their military is not very good. Pretty sure we can take on the Spanish. Hawaii is its own country, has a monarchy at this time. There's a queen who's in power at this time. Her name is Queen Liliuokalani. They're not super rich, but they're pretty isolated, so they don't need to be super rich or powerful. There's a lot of American companies who are growing sugar there. And these American companies desperately want Hawaii to become a part of the United States so they can lower the price of their sugar in the country. And we're pretty sure we can beat Hawaii. So now we just got to have the war. Enter these two guys. So there's a newspaper war taking place in the United States at this time. This is the way most people are getting their news and their information is through newspaper. Most of the newspapers in the country are owned by these two guys. These are the robber barons of the newspaper industry. William Randolph Hearst, who owns almost all of the newspapers west of the Mississippi, including the Denver newspaper at that time, the Rocky Mountain News. And Joseph Pulitzer owned almost all of the newspapers east of the Mississippi, including the very influential New York Times. So they're in this newspaper war over who's going to sell the most newspapers. Both men realize that if they can, a war, they can feel this war building between the United States and Spain. They can feel this imperialistic war beginning to build. A war with sensational stories, with these crazy war stories, a war would sell a lot of newspapers. Now, there are two very different types of journalists that were very popular at this time. They're still popular today, and but these journalists are both employed by Hearst and Pulitzer. They're called muckrakers and yellow journalists. So muckrakers, they uncover corruption and criminal acts and things like that. They're the progressive writers. If you remember the reading that we did on Lincoln Steffens, he's a muckraker. Jacob Riis is a muckraker. Upton Sinclair, who wrote the book The Jungle, he's a muckraker, right? So muckrakers uncover corruption. They're still around today. If you watch, if you know about 60 Minutes, the 60 Minutes TV show on Sunday evenings, those are muckrakers. They're uncovering corruption and criminal acts. Yellow journalists are journalists who take stories with a little bit of truth and they turn them into much larger, much crazier stories than they really are. Okay, so they sensationalize the stories. They build them up to be something larger and crazier than what they really are. If you think about when you're standing in line at King Stupid's and there's all the rack of all those newspapers there, right? The National Enquirer and the National Sun and the Star, whatever, even People Magazine to a certain degree. Those are yellow journalists, right? They overhype these stories and make them larger than what they are. So Hearst and Pulitzer send these muckrakers and yellow journalists into Cuba to stir up stories and find trouble. And they do find it. Spain runs some pretty brutal concentration camps in Cuba where they're torturing people, rats eating through people's faces, and they're popping people's heads off and just crazy stuff, right? So these stories begin to be published. And as people in the United States are reading these stories, people are horrified. And people are telling the United States, if we're a moral force, if we're a moral nation, we've got to stop this stuff from happening. And they begin putting pressure on the government to go in and be the moral Christian force that we say that we are. And so that begins to build up tensions and anger within the United States. It also builds up tensions and anger in Cuba between the Cubans and the Spanish government. And then February 15th, 1898. McKinley sends a battleship into the Havana harbor called the USS Maine. It's USS Maine. And he sends the battleship into the harbor to protect Americans and American businesses there. A lot of American businesses. So he sends the battleship in there just as a warning, right? Just as a show of strength. Don't mess with Americans or their businesses. In the middle of the night on February 15th, 1898, the Maine explodes. You can see people flying out of the ship. Wow! Woo! Right? You see all these people flying. Middle of the night, this happens. 260 American sailors are killed. Oof. McKinley immediately blames Spain, as does the rest of the country. Spain insists it did not blow up the ship. Spain says we didn't blow it up. We don't know who did it. We had nothing to do with it. Teddy Roosevelt begins going around the country demanding that McKinley declare war. He even calls McKinley a coward. McKinley's his boss, his direct boss. And Teddy Roosevelt's now calling McKinley a coward for not declaring war. Teddy Roosevelt believes that in order to be a manly man, you need to go into war and feel the sting of combat, is what he said. Right? So Teddy Roosevelt hasn't been in a war yet. So he desperately wants this, right, to become a manly man. McKinley at first resists the call for war. He's hoping that this empire can be achieved by peaceful means. So at first, McKinley resists the calls for war. But the pressure in the country, the political pressure in the country becomes so great that McKinley finally, on April 20th, 1898, goes to Congress and asks for and receives a declaration of war against Spain. Now, all great wars, right, have a slogan. The better the slogan, the better the war. You know this is going to be a great war, a fantastic war. So, because it has the greatest slogan in the history of wars. You ready? Oh, here we go. Greatest war slogan in history. Remember the Maine. Oh, that's a good start. That's a good start. The hell with Spain! Oh my God, that's good. Remember the Maine. To hell with Spain. Oh my goodness sakes, this is going to be a great war. So now we got a war. And you know what that means. We go to war. We do the war rap. You ready? United States tells Spain, I got one thing to say to you. When a gang of wild dogs tries to run me down and take the ring lead and make him look like a clown, unstoppable, untoppable, in case you forgot, I'm the king of the cats and I'm ready to rock. Let's go. Ooh, there's a war rap. We're going to do that every single time. When a gang of wild dogs tries to run me down and take the ring lead and make him look like a clown, unstoppable, untoppable, in case you forgot, I'm the king of the cats and I'm ready to rock. Let's go. Now, who blew up the Maine? Historical investigations have suggested that we actually probably accidentally blew up the Maine. So these ships are powered by these big coal furnaces. The more coal you put in the furnaces, the hotter the furnace burns and the more power there is. If you overfeed them, though, these furnaces can blow up. Well, we believe that one of these furnaces was overfed and the furnace blew up. And military intelligence, government intelligence, which is an oxymoron because it doesn't exist, when they designed this ship, they put the munitions room, which is where you store all of your weapons, your gunpowder and your bombs and all that. They put the munitions room back to back to the furnace room. So when this coal furnace blew up, it blew into the munitions room, igniting the munitions, the bombs, and the gunpowder, and we probably blew up our own ship. All right, so now we're at war. The war is over in a matter of weeks. It's a very, very, very short war. Like 6 weeks, war is over. Cuba's defeated within 3 weeks. Within 3 weeks, the war is over. Hawaii has a revolution. The United States Navy, on its way to the Philippines, kind of stops off in Hawaii, helps finish off the revolution. The monarchy is overthrown. Hawaii becomes part of the United States. A few weeks after the victory in Cuba, the United States Navy arrives in the Philippines. There's already a revolt happening in the Philippines among the Filipino people against the Spanish government. The United States military joins with the Filipino people in this revolt against the Spanish, and they finish off the Spanish in the Philippines. And within a matter of weeks, we've gone from having no empire to having an empire. Now, when the war breaks out, Teddy Roosevelt immediately resigns as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and he gets the government to create a military cavalry unit. So they're going to be on horseback to go and fight the war in Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt calls this military unit, this cavalry unit, the Rough Riders. And the Rough Riders are engaged in the one big battle of this war, the Battle of San Juan Hill. So here's the story. Cuba is a pretty flat country. I mean, it's like Kansas. And the highest point is San Juan Hill, which is just a hill. On top of San Juan Hill is this big Spanish fort. Teddy Roosevelt arrives in Cuba the very next day. He leads this valiant fight. You can see there's a painting here. This valiant fight up San Juan Hill. And they're fighting and they're riding up on horses and there's bombs going off, right? And guns going off. And eventually they get up to the Spanish fort at the top of the hill. They engage in hand-to-hand combat and they overthrow the fort. Yay! And that's the story, right? They're up there. There's a painting there. They're up there running on horses and stuff. If you've seen Night at the Museum, right? Robin Williams' character in War at Night at the Museum is Teddy Roosevelt leading the charge up San Juan Hill. That's Teddy Roosevelt right there, who is then played by Robin Williams. So that's the story. And it goes into the newspapers and becomes part of American history, and it's this legend. Teddy Roosevelt becomes this massive war hero. Except it didn't happen that way. They didn't go up San Juan Hill. They went up the hill next to San Juan Hill, which is not as tall. Why did they do that? Because that's where the Spanish put their fort. Why would the Spanish put their fort on the smaller hill and not the bigger hill? I don't know. Probably why Spain doesn't have an empire any longer, because they did things like that. There's no horses there. The horses haven't been shipped. The horses actually won't arrive in Cuba until after the war is over. So Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders go up this hill on foot. Now they do take over the fort, and this is a picture of them right here at the end of the battle. You notice there's no horses because there's no horses there yet. So how did we get this? Teddy Roosevelt made it up. He told a newspaper writer who was with him, write the story that we went up San Juan Hill. That's a bigger hill, so that's a better story. It's always more exciting to fight on horses than it is on foot. So say that we were on horses. Newspaper writer did, and it becomes the story. And we get this picture, which is not at all true at all. Yeah. Within a summer, within a matter of weeks, the United States goes from having no empire to having an empire. Spain goes from having what's left of a once great empire to no empire. And Teddy Roosevelt comes home a larger-than-life hero. Teddy Roosevelt was already very popular, very famous before this. Now he's literally a living legend in the United States. People love Teddy Roosevelt. He is now a war hero. Teddy Roosevelt is this larger-than-life figure. Teddy Roosevelt is almost like a superhero figure at that time. And the Republican Party is not happy because they do not like Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is, in their mind, just a lunatic. In November of 1898, right after the war, Teddy Roosevelt's elected governor of New York. And the Republicans are now horrified because Teddy Roosevelt is now the leader of the largest, richest, most important state in the Union. Oh my God, the Republicans can't stand this. And they desperately now want Teddy Roosevelt gone. They just want to get rid of Teddy Roosevelt. And then they come up with a plan to destroy Teddy Roosevelt's political career and silence him once and for all so he's no longer an embarrassment to the Republican Party, that he's no longer uncontrollable. And here's their plan. Teddy Roosevelt, the Republicans are convinced they got to get rid of Teddy Roosevelt as a political figure. 1900 is an election year. We're going to choose a new president. McKinley is immensely popular. McKinley is maybe the only person that could rival Teddy Roosevelt in terms of popularity in the United States at that time. McKinley is immensely popular. So the Republicans come up with a plan. They're going to use the election and send Teddy Roosevelt to the political graveyard. They nominate Teddy Roosevelt to be McKinley's vice president. The vice presidency is a political graveyard. Once you're vice president, your political career, for the most part, is over. It is very rare that you ever hear from vice presidents ever again. It's just what it is, right? I mean, think back on the past vice presidents. Certainly, you've got Joe Biden, who's now running for president. That's very different. That's an anomaly. That's very strange. Before him was Dick Cheney. You don't hear anything about Dick Cheney. Before him was Al Gore. You don't hear anything about Al Gore. Before him was Dan Quayle. You don't hear anything about Dan Quayle, right? So it's a political graveyard. You just go there to die. Vice president really doesn't have any power. Vice president really doesn't do anything. You never hear from the vice president. That's where political careers go to die. So they nominate Teddy Roosevelt to be vice president. And there's the campaign slogan there, right? The administration's promises have been kept. Promises made, promises kept. That was kind of their slogan. And Roosevelt accepts this. Roosevelt knows what the Republicans are going to do, but he also understands it gives him time to do what he really wants to do, and that's to go hike, to go camp, to go fish, to go hunt, and he gets paid pretty well. And then September 14th, 1901, McKinley is shot and he dies. Roosevelt is now president. The life of the Republican Party flashes before their eyes, right? One of the most powerful Republicans at the time, a guy by the name of Mark Hanna, remarks upon hearing that McKinley had died. Mark Hanna says, "That damned cowboy is now president." This is exactly what the Republican Party didn't want. And this is exactly what the Republican Party now has. And we're done. Have a good one, Panthers.